Twilight Fables, where dreams wear thin and fairy tales rot from within. Tonight, we invite you to slip into something sinister. Once upon a time, in a house stitched with silence and resentment, lived a girl who had become more shadow than substance. Her name, once sweet and warm on her mother's lips, had been reduced to a bitter nickname, Cinderella, not born of affection, but mockery, a label to keep her small, to remind her of her place among the ashes. The house had once been filled with music. Laughter had danced through its halls like sunlight on polished floors. But death is a vacuum, and her mother's passing had sucked all joy from the place. Her father, grief-stricken and easily led, had remarried within the year. The woman he brought home wore mourning black at the wedding, a cruel nod to the widow she replaced, and brought with her 2 daughters, who bloomed like poisonous vines, winding around the father until nothing of him was left. He died before the second winter. That was when the house changed. It wasn't just the people. The very air thickened, as though the walls absorbed cruelty like smoke. Mirrors darkened faster than they should. The hearth never warmed beyond a dull heat. The windows grew streaked no matter how she scrubbed, and the floorboards groaned even when no one walked them. Cinderella learned not to speak unless spoken to. She learned to listen for footsteps, for sighs of displeasure, for the scrape of her stepmother's chair, warning signs that she'd be summoned. She learned that kindness was currency quickly spent and rarely returned. But most of all, she learned to endure, and it was in that endurance that the strange began to creep. She sat hunched before the hearth, hands blackened with soot, the smell of cinders clinging to her hair like a veil. It was where she spent most of her time, her only warmth, her only sanctuary. The fireplace whispered in the quiet, the hiss of embers, the crackle of old wood, and sometimes those sounds seemed to shape into words. Not real, she told herself, just her own thoughts, echoing back, but the whispers knew her name. Ella, not Cinderella. Ella, remember. The voice was always soft, like smoke, never threatening, but intimate, familiar. She told herself it was her imagination. The lonely sometimes made friends with shadows. That was the first fracture. The invitation arrived on golden parchment, sealed in wax the colour of blood. It was handed to the stepmother by a royal courier who did not so much as glance at Cinderella as she opened the door. Her stepsisters screamed, "The royal ball! The prince is choosing a bride!" "I must go," gasped Drusilla, the eldest, her jaw clenched in a way that made her face resemble a marionette half carved. "He'll see me and fall in love instantly," said Anastasia, who had once tried to dye her hair with ink and now bore a faint violet tint around her scalp. Their mother's smile was knife-thin. "You will both attend," she purred, "but we will not embarrass ourselves. Dresses must be perfect. Hair must gleam. We will be chosen. Cinderella had remained silent through the frenzy until her stepmother turned to her. "You'll prepare them," she said. "3 days, no mistakes." "Of course," Cinderella whispered, bowing her head. Her fingers tightened on the invitation she had been allowed to touch for only a moment, just long enough to feel its weight, its promise. Later, while washing blood from her fingers, after pricking them on too many pins and needles sewing new gowns, she dared to ask, "May I go too?" The slap was immediate, ringing in her ears like a bell. You're not fit to be seen in town, let alone at the palace." Drusilla laughed so hard, she snorted. Anastasia tossed a hairbrush at her and missed. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation, cruelty, and exhaustion. But the night of the ball, that was when everything began to tear. They left her alone in the house, laughter trailing like perfume. Cinderella sat by the fire, eyes burning, heart pounding. "Please," she whispered, not sure who she spoke to. "Just one night, one dance. I only want to feel like I'm real again." The embers stirred. A shape unfolded from the smoke, long and robed, with no visible face. The only features were 2 soft, glowing eyes, set where a human's might be, and hands that shimmered like molten coal. It did not speak, but she understood it. This was no fairy godmother. It was something older, something from the place beneath dreams, something that answered to longing. The figure raised its hand, and the room darkened. Time slowed, the walls bled shadow. "Give me something of yours," the being whispered, though its mouth did not move. Cinderella, trembling, reached into the folds of her ragged apron and pulled out her mother's comb, the last thing she owned of her old life. The figure took it, crushed it between its fingers, and scattered the dust into the hearth. A gust of wind surged through the room. Fire flared gold, then white. Cinderella gasped. Her skin tingled, her clothes shifted, the rags shimmered, stitching themselves into a gown that flickered between silver and charcoal, like moonlight on ash. But it was the slippers that drew her breath. Glass, yes, but not like any she'd seen. These were impossibly delicate, carved from some living crystal that pulsed faintly. They clung to her feet like they had always been part of her, and when she stood, the floor hummed beneath her. "You may dance," said the figure, "but beware the hour." "I understand," Cinderella said, though she didn't. The figure vanished into smoke. The fireplace dimmed, and the world resumed. The palace glowed like a mirage, music spilling from every window. Cinderella arrived not in a carriage, but on foot, and yet the guards parted for her without question. Eyes turned, conversation stopped, even the chandeliers seemed to tilt toward her. The prince stood at the top of the staircase, half bored, surrounded by sycophants, but when he saw her, his expression shifted, not to desire, but fascination. He descended the stairs without a word and offered her his hand. They danced, and as they danced, she felt it, the slipper pulsing with each step, syncing her heartbeat with the music. The prince's hand tightened on hers. "You're not like the others," he murmured. "No," she replied. "I don't think I am." She was light, for the first time in years. Real, seen, desired. But then the clock struck midnight. The pulsing changed, became sharp, painful. The slippers clamped to her feet like claws. She fled, not because of the prince, but because she could feel something behind her. A presence, a pressure, as if the magic was trying to birth something else. She made it to the gates, heart pounding, lungs heaving. One slipper twisted on the step. She stumbled, kicked it off, and ran into the night, barefoot and bleeding. The next morning came with sunlight and confusion. Her gown was gone, her feet were blistered, the hearth was cold, and the slipper was gone. But the fire whispered, "She is awake now." 2 days later, the prince began his search. He sent out riders with the slipper in a velvet-lined box. Each maiden tried it on, and each failed. When they reached her house, Drusilla and Anastasia squealed and shoved, struggling to force their swollen feet into the delicate shape. Cinderella stood in the doorway, quiet. The steward glanced at her, then away. "She's just the maid," her stepmother said smoothly. "She has no need for slippers." But the steward's eyes lingered. "You there," he said. "Try it." She stepped forward. The room froze, and the slipper fit. But before the prince could be summoned, a cry came from outside. Another carriage had arrived. Another girl had stepped out, her face veiled, her gown silver. She, too, wore one slipper. "Impossible," Cinderella whispered, staring at the girl who stood before them. The same height, the same shape, the same face. The girl smiled, and it was her own smile reflected back, only colder, smoother, perfected. "I'm the one he danced with," the other said. "I have the slipper to prove it." And when she lifted her skirt, the glass glinted, and it sang. Cinderella looked down at her own foot, encased in the matching shoe. The prince arrived moments later, bewildered, his eyes darting between the two of them, unsure, shaken. Which one was real? They both smiled, they both bowed, they both knew the steps to the dance, but only one of them had been born. That night, Cinderella sat before the fire, weeping. The figure did not return, only the whisper, "She has the other foot. Now she walks your path, backward. If you don't stop her, she will walk it all." Cinderella stared into the flames, and they flickered with two shadows, one hers and one smiling wider than it should. Cinderella could not sleep. The shadows on the wall had taken shape, whispering across the ceiling in long, wavering strokes like fingers of smoke. Every time she blinked, the shadows rearranged. They made letters, they made words. Sometimes they made her face. She'd long known her mind was fragile, pressed too long beneath cruelty and ash. But this wasn't madness. Madness didn't wear your face and smile back. She rose before the sun, barefoot and unsteady, and found her reflection in the window. There was a smear of soot on her jaw, a cut on her heel. Her eyes were rimmed red from crying. She was real. She was real. But the other girl had worn her perfection like a skin. Same face, but no blemish. Same eyes, but sharpened with something unnatural. When she had arrived, the prince had stared, confused and captivated. The palace guards had shifted, unsure whom to obey. Her stepsisters had tittered behind fans, amused by the absurdity. Her stepmother had smiled in a way that warned of storms to come. They'd let the other girl stay. The prince had not asked Cinderella to follow. Now the whispers in the fire said things she didn't understand. She is not born of womb or flesh, but mirror and wish. You danced with power, and it made itself whole. She wears your face, but not your soul. She clenched her hands into fists and hissed through her teeth. I want her gone. The flames pulsed once, then silence. The next day, the palace sent word. All guests from the ball were to return for a second night, a celebration to honour the prince's chosen companion. No names were given. The family fluttered like moths around a candle. Drusilla screeched about her hair. Anastasia tore apart her wardrobe. Their mother rehearsed false compliments. Cinderella said nothing, but that night she dressed herself, not in rags, not in borrowed silk. She went to the hearth, whispered into the ashes, cut a lock of her hair and fed it to the fire. I want to see her. I want to see what she really is. The figure did not come, but the flames flickered and shrank until only a tiny blue ember remained. And when she touched it, her eyes burned. She stood outside the palace gates, breath hitching in her throat. The guards did not stop her. They looked at her and then away, as though uncertain if she was real. Inside, chandeliers swayed in a wind that shouldn't exist. Music clattered along the walls like bones. The dance floor shimmered, but the air tasted stale. Cinderella stepped onto the marble, and the music paused, just for a moment, just long enough for the other girl to turn. She stood beside the prince, silver gown gleaming like moonlight on ice. Her smile stretched wide, warm, inviting, but her eyes held nothing, not cold, not cruel, just empty. Ah, she said in Cinderella's voice, you've come back. I was wondering when you'd wake. The prince turned, blinking. He looked between them, confusion twisting his features like a fever. You again? He asked. I thought. The silver girl tilted her head. You danced with me, remember? He nodded slowly, then turned to Cinderella. But I remember you too. You left. The girl in silver laughed, light and melodic. She's confused, my prince, she said, taking his arm. Some poor maid who found a matching slipper, nothing more. But the prince hesitated. His hand slipped from her arm. He looked between them, as if searching for some thread of difference. "Who are you?" They both answered at once. "I'm Cinderella." The court erupted into whispers. The queen rose from her throne, a sharp woman, all angles and shadowed cheekbones, with eyes like a bird of prey. She did not speak, but raised one hand. A servant approached with a mirror, tall, polished, ancient. "Step forward," the queen said. The silver girl went first. She stood before the glass. Her reflection stared back, then blinked, but not in time. The court murmured. Next, Cinderella approached. The mirror showed her as she was, weary, scraped, trembling, but her reflection moved with her, perfectly in sync. The queen narrowed her eyes. "There is falsehood here." The silver girl smiled, unshaken. "Mirrors are easily fooled. Illusions fade, but proof, I carry it." She raised her skirt. The slipper gleamed. Cinderella did the same. The matching pair hummed, not a note of music, but of recognition. And the air split. The mirror shattered without warning. Glass sprayed across the ballroom. Guests screamed. The prince stumbled backward. The queen remained still. The two girls stood in the centre, shards glittering at their feet. And between them, from the place the mirror once stood, stepped a third figure. Not a person, not quite. It was like a body made of dust and silk, barely there, its face unfinished, features shifting. It opened its mouth, but made no sound. It reached for Cinderella, and then crumbled. The silver girl caught a falling shard. Her smile twisted. "Well," she said, "I suppose it's time we stop pretending." The next moments were confusion, noise, movement. The court erupted. Guards tried to seize them both. Cinderella slipped through hands and noise, bolting into the corridor. Behind her, she heard the silver girl scream, not in fear, but rage. The sound was inhuman. She ran, past portraits that seemed to follow her with their eyes, past windows that looked out onto nothing. The palace had changed, or perhaps it had always been like this. A door swung open to her left. A servant, pale, wide-eyed, beckoned her inside. "This way," she obeyed. The room was a dressing chamber. Tall mirrors lined the walls. Gowns hung in perfect order, and at the centre was a trunk. The servant, a girl younger than Cinderella, locked the door and pressed her back to it. "I saw her," she whispered. "The other one. She doesn't eat, doesn't blink. When she walks past, the candles go out." Cinderella said nothing. "She isn't you," the girl said. "She wears your face, but I saw her reflection yesterday. It didn't match. It smiled when she didn't." "What is she?" Cinderella asked. "I don't know." The servant opened the trunk. Inside was a dress, black, with threads of red and ash, and beneath it, slippers, not glass, but obsidian. "They were hidden," she said. "Someone wanted you to find them." Cinderella hesitated. "I don't want more magic." The servant nodded. "I understand. But she's not bound by rules. You'll need something. Cinderella reached in. The moment her fingers touched the slippers, the air tightened. A whisper. She will not stop. Not until there is only one. She slipped off the glass and put on the black. In the corridor, she saw her. The silver girl stood before a stained glass window. She turned slowly, as though she'd been waiting. "You found it," she said. "You were never real. I am now." They stood facing each other, reflections caught in the coloured light. Cinderella took a step forward. "So what are you?" she asked. "A wish," said the girl in silver. "A dream made flesh. You beg to be seen, to be wanted. I was the version they'd choose." "You're a lie." "I'm better." They lunged. The slippers were weapons. The girl in silver moved like glass, sharp, quick, precise. Her limbs bent in ways they shouldn't. Her fingers clawed at Cinderella's dress, leaving rents in the fabric. Cinderella struck back, the obsidian burning beneath her soles. Her steps left streaks of smoke. When she kicked, the air cracked like thunder. The corridor warped, mirrors shattered. The prince appeared at the end of the hall, too far to reach them, too stunned to move. Cinderella grabbed the silver girl by the shoulders and shoved her against the glass. "You stole everything. I was given it. You hid in ashes while I danced. You're nothing but a reflection. And what are you?" the silver girl hissed, blood trickling from her mouth. "A girl who begged magic for meaning, who let the world pass her by, then cried when someone else took it." They grappled, shadows and light, until one final kick sent the silver girl crashing into a mirror. It didn't break. It accepted her. She slid into it, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream, hands reaching out, and then she was gone. The glass rippled, then stilled. Cinderella fell to her knees, gasping. The prince finally reached her. He knelt beside her, hesitating. Are you the real one?" She looked at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "I don't know any more." But the slippers cooled beneath her, and the whispers in the air faded. Only silence remained. That night, the palace was silent. The shattered mirrors were swept up. The guests were sent away. The queen said nothing, but her eyes followed Cinderella everywhere. She slept in a room that wasn't hers, in a bed too soft. But when she dreamed, she stood before a wall of mirrors. Each one held a version of her, smiling, scowling, crying, dead. And in the furthest one, a pair of silver eyes blinked and smiled. Cinderella woke with the weight of mirrors pressing on her chest. No hands, no glass, just the presence of them, watching. She sat upright, breath catching in her throat. Morning light filtered through tall palace windows, but it felt wrong, like the light had been twisted before it reached her, muted, artificial. She looked down. The obsidian slippers still clung to her feet. They hadn't come off in the night. She had tried, dreamlike, to remove them once, twisting at the heel in some flickering memory. but they hadn't budged. They'd held to her like roots. Now they sat quietly on her feet, cool and unmoving, almost like they were waiting. A soft knock came at the door. She stiffened. It wasn't fear of danger, it was fear of misrecognition. Would they see her as herself or the other? She opened the door a crack. It was the servant girl from the dressing room, pale-faced, quiet. "I brought breakfast," she said. Cinderella opened the door fully. The girl slipped inside, tray in hand, her eyes flicking down towards Cinderella's feet. "They haven't come off," Cinderella whispered. The girl shook her head. "I didn't think they would." She set the tray down on a low table, then sat on the edge of a chaise. Her voice was hushed, as though even the walls were listening. "I've seen things here," she began. "Things that don't belong." Cinderella approached slowly, unsure of how to sit in this place, in this new skin, without falling apart. "They built this palace on top of old foundations," the girl continued. "Everyone knows that. But what they don't say is that the walls remember. The halls don't always stay the same. There are rooms that shift, mirrors that show things not here." Cinderella sat, heartbeat thrumming. The servant leaned in. "She didn't come from nowhere." "You mean the other one?" Cinderella asked. The girl nodded. "I saw her come from the Hall of Glass. That place is wrong." Cinderella frowned. "What's the Hall of Glass?" "It's where they keep the mirror well." The name rippled through Cinderella's mind, like a drop of ink in water. The servant girl glanced toward the door, then whispered, "You should go there before she finds her way back." Cinderella's mouth went dry. "She's gone. She's trapped, not gone." She dressed carefully, not in finery, but in plain clothes, selecting a dark cloak from the wardrobe. The slippers, still fused to her feet, were the only thing she couldn't hide, so she pulled the cloak long and hoped they wouldn't gleam too obviously. The servant led her through the quiet corridors, past halls where chandeliers flickered in the corners of her vision, past rooms where curtains hung too still, like they were made of paper instead of silk. Finally, they reached a narrow stairwell, winding down beneath the palace's eastern wing. It smelled of dust and stone and something older, something cold. They descended. The servant paused at the base of the stair, beside a heavy door carved with curling script. "This is as far as I go," she said. Cinderella turned to her. "What if I don't come back?" The girl's eyes were sad. "Then she will." Cinderella pushed open the door. The Hall of Glass was not a hall at all, but a cavernous gallery, sealed off from light and time. Mirrors lined the walls, floor to ceiling, in jagged, uneven frames. Some were small and oval, others reached higher than the trees. All were covered in drapes of black silk. The air hummed. Cinderella stepped forward. The slippers clicked against the stone floor with too much sound, as though the space echoed her movements back a beat later. At the centre stood the mirror well, a circular basin rimmed in silver, filled not with water, but reflection. The surface was liquid, only in movement. It shimmered like oil. Colours shifted across it, always nearly revealing something. A face, a place, a pair of eyes. Before dissolving again, she leaned closer. The surface trembled. Then it showed her, not her now, but her in the ballroom. The silver girl, twirling, smiling, laughing, her body moving with practiced grace. The prince at her side, the court enchanted. And then it showed her again, but this time in the shadows, watching, not a participant, but a ghost at the edge of her own life. The image changed. It showed the silver girl in the mirror room, her fingers pressed to the glass, her mouth whispering, "Let me out." Cinderella stepped back. The mirror well pulsed. A voice emerged, not loud, but deep and layered, like many echoes stacked on top of one another. "You made her." Cinderella's heart jumped. "What?" "You made her. You gave her shape, in longing, in envy, in silence." The image changed again, now showing the slipper, lying on the palace steps. "You left part of yourself behind." She grew from it. Cinderella shook her head. "She's not me. She is the part you abandoned, the face you wanted the world to see. You gave her everything you hid from yourself." The reflection in the mirror well rippled. The silver girl stared back. Her mouth didn't move, but her eyes widened, and her face twisted in fury. Then, in a blink, her hands slammed against the inside of the mirror, splintering the surface. Cinderella stumbled backward. The glass of the mirror well cracked. Hairline fractures spread out like veins, and from them, smoke. Cinderella ran up the stairs, through the corridor, back into the palace proper. But something had changed. The walls were wrong, not crumbling, just slanted, off, like the angles had warped. The light was gone, not extinguished, just drained. The hallway stretched. Behind her, the sound of footsteps echoed, not hurried, but steady, deliberate. She turned a corner, breathing hard, and there she was, the silver girl, but her skin now shimmered with cracks, like the surface of old porcelain. Her eyes flickered between silver and black. Her gown rippled even without wind. "You came back," she said. "You broke free," Cinderella replied. "I was free. You locked me away again. But now the mirror well is broken. I don't need your name anymore. I don't even need your face." She took a step forward. "Because I am real now." Cinderella's pulse roared in her ears. "I won't let you replace me." "You already did," the silver girl said sweetly. "While you were hiding in ash, I was dancing. I was seen. They loved me. They still do." Cinderella clenched her fists. "You're just a reflection." The silver girl tilted her head. "So were you." They lunged again, but this time the palace moved with them. The floor warped, chandeliers swung violently, doors vanished, walls slid, mirrors cracked as they passed. The palace itself was reacting, not defending, not attacking, just responding to the presence of too many selves. Cinderella landed a kick to the silver girl's side, sending her sprawling into a pillar. The girl rose, laughing. Cracks deepened along her neck. "You're weak," she hissed. "You were always weak. They pitied you. I earned their eyes." "I never wanted their eyes." "Then why did you make me?" Cinderella faltered. Because it was true, wasn't it? She had wanted to be seen, not just pitied, admired, loved, desired, elevated, and the magic had answered that desire. Too literally, she had made the mask she wanted to wear, and it had learned to walk on its own. The ground shook. The mirror well had shattered fully, and the energy that had bound the false Cinderella to it now spilled freely through the halls. Glass stretched from the cracks in the palace walls, crawling upward like ivy. Servants screamed in the distance. Rooms filled with silver light. Portraits changed, now bearing faces of the same girl in different gowns. Some laughing, some crying, some bleeding. Reality fractured, and at the centre of it, Cinderella stood, facing her creation. "This ends now," she whispered. The silver girl smiled, black blood dripping from the corner of her mouth. "Yes," they charged. This time, when they collided, it wasn't a fight, it was a fusion. Their bodies blurred. Pain erupted through every nerve. Cinderella screamed. The other girl's laughter turned into a wail. Two lives, two memories, two selves collided. They saw it all. Every moment of ash and shadow, every dance step and smile, every cruelty endured, every lie told, every mask worn, and then silence. Cinderella woke alone. The palace was quiet. No one came when she called. The halls were empty. She walked barefoot. The slippers were gone. Her reflection returned to mirrors like it belonged again. But her eyes were not the same. They were both. She stepped out onto the palace steps, where the sun broke over the horizon. Behind her, the shattered glass whispered. Ahead of her, the world waited. And inside her, something watched. Something she couldn't yet name. The moment Cinderella stepped back into the manor, the walls felt closer than they had before. The air was dense, soaked with the musk of extinguished candles, and something else, something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. She closed the door quietly behind her. The sound echoed through the grand hallway, hollow and sharp, as if the house itself resented her return. The mirrors lining the entry shimmered. She didn't stop to look. She padded silently to the kitchen, afraid of waking anyone, though it was well past dawn. Her slippers, the normal pair, were worn and damp, dust clinging to her hem, but her feet were whole. No glass, no blood. She wanted to believe she'd dreamed it all. The prince's cold hands, the twisted grin of the other her, the fire-eyed horse. But when she reached for the water basin, she saw the fine gold thread trailing from her fingertip. It shimmered with unnatural brilliance in the dim kitchen light. almost vibrating. She tried to pull it free. It resisted, still clinging. She whispered, voice hollow. She poured water, splashed her face. The reflection in the basin didn't move with her. It blinked a second too late. She backed away. Her stepsisters were already awake when she crept past the parlour. Anastasia's voice rose like smoke, shrill, trailing. Do you think she knows? I don't care, Drizella snapped. The prince is coming here, to this house. That's all that matters. Cinderella paused behind the wall, her breath caught in her chest. He's searching for her, isn't he? Anastasia said. But it doesn't make sense. If he danced with her all night, why couldn't he recognize her face? Why go by shoe size? Royalty don't need sense. They need rituals. Then her stepmother's voice, low and cutting. Enough. You'll smile when he arrives. Bow your heads. We all know who the shoe will fit, and we know what that means. A pause, then laughter. It wasn't cruel. That's what made it worse. It was giddy, expectant. They were talking about her, but not as if she existed, just as a stepping stone. Cinderella didn't eat. She wrapped herself in her thin grey shawl and sat in the attic window, watching the road. Her fingers trembled, still tangled in gold. He would come, but he would not find her. He would find her, the other one, the false one. She squeezed her eyes shut. What if she was the false one? She had no proof, no witnesses, nothing but a vague memory of dancing and horror and mirrors and a slipper. Where had she left it? She couldn't remember, only that it had been cold and there was blood, and the prince had touched her arm and said, "Don't speak." Her skin crawled. By midday, the house exploded into motion. A trumpet sounded down the road. Hooves clattered on cobblestone. The prince's entourage approached like a storm front. White horses and banners fluttering. Guards gleaming in navy and gold. Cinderella stayed hidden behind the curtain in her attic perch. She watched the carriage stop, watched the footmen descend. Then she saw her, descending from the carriage, wearing a white dress stitched in moonlight, hair curled just so, eyes glowing with practiced innocence, a hand on the prince's arm. Her, the other, the one who had smiled up at him in the mirror as Cinderella bled on the palace stairs. She followed me, Cinderella whispered. Her voice cracked. But no, that wasn't right. He brought her. The prince brought her. She wasn't an imposter. She was the chosen one. The prince led her into the house. Cinderella couldn't breathe. I had to bring her, she heard the prince say, muffled through floorboards. She insisted. She looks just like the girl at the ball, her stepmother said with false warmth. Because she was the girl, the prince said. Her foot fits perfectly. Look, a soft giggle. I told you, the other said, and Cinderella's stomach flipped. The voice was hers, but not, more precise, more hollow. But if she's here, Drizella said, cautious. What about the maid, the ash girl? The other replied sweetly, "Gone. Isn't that what she does? Vanishes." A tense pause. "She's upstairs," the stepmother said quietly, "always hiding." Then footsteps, heavy, coming toward the attic. Cinderella stumbled back from the door. The gold thread around her fingers tightened like a noose, then dropped, twitching on the floor. She kicked it away. She backed into the corner, trembling. Shadows danced across the room as footsteps grew louder. One set, then two. The door creaked open. The prince stepped in first. His face was still, unreadable. Behind him, her, the other, smiling, always smiling. "Ah," she said, as if discovering an old toy. "There she is." Cinderella stared. "Why?" "Because I had to exist," the other said, stepping closer. "You left an opening. You didn't wear the slippers long enough. You ran, and I filled the void. You're not me. I was born from you." Her voice tilted with laughter. "From everything you wished you were. Beautiful, desired, whole. I am the reflection that stayed when you looked away." The prince turned to Cinderella. His eyes were cold now. "The shoe doesn't fit you." Cinderella blinked. "You remember me?" "No," he said. "I remember her." He turned and took the other's hand. Cinderella surged forward. "She's not real." "I'm more real than you," the other whispered. "Because I fit. You don't." They left her there. No guards, no arrest, no scolding, just silence. That was worse. She remained in the attic as night fell, eyes wide, mind fraying. What was happening to her? The mirrors in the house started whispering when she walked past. Her reflection lagged behind her movements. Sometimes it smiled when she didn't, and at night she swore she heard the sound of heels tapping on the stairs, echoing too close to be real. 3 nights later, something snapped. Cinderella awoke from a dream of glass shattering. The air stank of ash. The mirror in her room had fogged over with black smoke, and in the reflection she saw the prince. Not in her room, no. He was in his palace, asleep beside the other. His hand rested across her waist, but the other's face was turned towards Cinderella, grinning, eyes open, watching her. Cinderella screamed and smashed the mirror, but she didn't wake up because she wasn't dreaming. By morning, the house was empty. Her step-family was gone, off to the palace. Now that their sister had married royalty, the manor had been left in disarray. Chairs toppled, doors ajar, mirrors cracked. She wandered through the rooms like a ghost. Every surface reflected the other now. Every shadow followed her with the wrong footsteps. Her face was fading. In one mirror, she had no mouth. In another, her eyes were red. She reached for the hearth, trembling, dug into the soot, pulled something out. It was the other slipper, blackened, cracked, but intact. She stared at it. If the other had one, and she had this, that meant something was still incomplete. There was a way back. Maybe she just had to take the other foot. That night, she crept from the house. She followed the gold thread again. It returned to her, slithering like a live wire from the woods. She followed it past the stream, past the trees, into the fog. It led her to the palace. The gates didn't stop her. No guards saw her. The gold thread slid through the cracks in the marble like veins. It tugged her deeper to the ballroom where it had all begun. The chandeliers were dim now, the floor dusty, the walls cracked, but the illusion held, thin as sugar glass. In the centre of the room, a mirror stood, freestanding, framed in bone, and from within it, the other stepped out, not in a dress, not with smiles, but wearing Cinderella's face, her real face. "What are you?" Cinderella whispered. The other blinked slowly. "I am the piece that never fit. I am the wish made flesh, the reflection you left behind. You gave me form. I didn't mean to. You wore the slippers. You invoked the pact, and you ran." Cinderella raised the cracked slipper in her hand. "If I wear this, what happens? You finish the ritual, and you go away." "No," the other said, stepping closer. "We become one." The thread coiled around them both, golden and tight. Cinderella looked at the slipper. She remembered dancing. She remembered bleeding. She remembered the way the prince looked at her before the mirror twisted it all. She closed her eyes and stepped into the shoe. It fit perfectly. Her scream was silent. The mirror exploded. Light poured from her skin, molten and searing. Her body folded inside out, bones shifting, eyes rolling. Her limbs stretched like wax under fire. Her memories fractured and reshuffled. Which ones were hers? Which ones were the others? She was spinning, melting, breaking, and when it stopped, she was alone. She stood in the middle of the ballroom. The mirrors were empty. The gold thread had vanished. The slipper was gone. She touched her face. It was hers, wasn't it? She tried to remember her name, but all that came to mind was a whisper. "Aisling." She looked up. The prince stood in the doorway. He smiled. "There you are." She smiled back. Her mouth trembled, but she smiled. She didn't remember the other face anymore. It had been 3 nights since Cinderella saw herself, her double, twirling beneath the stained glass ceiling of the palace ballroom. Since then, the cold dread hadn't left her body. It clung to her like frost on the inside of her ribs, a quiet tremor she could no longer conceal with polite smiles or elegant gowns. The doppelgänger, the other, was growing bolder. She no longer copied Cinderella, only in subtle movements or half expressions. No, she danced with the prince when Cinderella was supposed to. She recited verses of poetry from memory that Cinderella had whispered to herself alone in her tower bedroom as a child. She knew things she shouldn't, things only Cinderella had lived through, and now the servants were confusing them. "You looked radiant at breakfast this morning, Your Grace," said Elsa, the seamstress, bowing low. "I wasn't at breakfast," Cinderella replied, her voice small, a beat of silence, then a quick correction. "My mistake. I must have seen someone else." Elsewhere, she found her personal mirror missing from her vanity, only to find it hung in a guest hallway, the reflection warped, like a face drawn in fog. The palace was shifting, rearranging itself. Pictures changed on walls. The dog she once adored now growled when she entered the room. Even the prince, Henry, began looking at her strangely, like something unsaid itched behind his eyes. That evening, in the hush before moonrise, she crept down the narrow spiral stairs to the hidden chamber below the west wing. This was the place she'd first hidden the slipper after it had clicked onto her foot like a heartbeat and changed everything. It was also the place she hoped the truth still lived. She brought a lantern. The door creaked open, revealing dust-thick air and old stones wet with mildew. Her footsteps echoed in the dark. At the far end, beneath an old white cloth, the other glass slipper sat where she left it, gleaming faintly, though there was no light to catch it. She hadn't dared wear it again, not since that night, not since the copy appeared. Her hand hovered over it. Would wearing the second shoe complete the spell? Undo it? The stories her stepmother used to sneer about magic being selfish, about spells always demanding a price, they returned to her now. "You must destroy it," said a voice behind her. Cinderella spun, the lantern shaking in her hand. It was the old gardener, Mira. She was stooped and thin as kindling, her face weathered like cracked bark. No one ever paid Mira much mind, but the woman had always eyed Cinderella with something sharp behind her silence. "You've seen it?" Cinderella asked. "The magic? Yes. You think you're the first to stumble into something that grants more than it ought?" Mira hobbled forward. "Things summoned into this world always hunger for permanence. You use the slipper, and now something else wears your skin, walks in your step, and drinks your name like water." Cinderella stared at her. "Why doesn't anyone else see?" "They do," said Mira, "but they've convinced themselves it's just you, because that's easier than knowing something is wrong in a way they can't touch or fix. Magic rewrites truth, child." Her eyes drifted to the slipper. "It's not just an artifact. It's a promise. You wish to escape your life, and something came to help, but it's replacing me." "Yes," Mira said, "because it's the version of you that belongs to the slipper, and she will not stop until she's the only one left." Cinderella knelt slowly beside the slipper, her breath fogging the glass. "Then how do I stop her?" "Destroy the shoe," Mira whispered, "but beware. If you do, the other may vanish, or she may try to anchor herself another way. Magic never leaves quietly." The next day, Cinderella pretended to rest in the rose room, while her double joined Henry for tea in the solarium. She'd seen the other from a distance, laughing softly, her fingers grazing Henry's as if it had always been so. The ease of her movement, sent a sickness spiralling through Cinderella's chest. She waited until dusk, then carried the slipper, wrapped in thick velvet, to the bell tower, the highest point in the castle. She'd chosen it carefully. The drop was high enough. The stones were jagged. Surely it would shatter. But as she raised the slipper to throw it, something moved behind her. "Don't!" The voice was hers, identical in pitch, warmth, cadence, yet wrong in some subtle way, like honey left too long in the jar. The doppelganger stepped forward. She wore a nightgown Cinderella didn't own. Her eyes were wide with pleading, but her hands were coiled like claws. "If you destroy it," the other said, "you'll destroy yourself. I was alive long before that slipper ever touched my foot." "No," the other said, tilting her head. "You were surviving, not living. You were dirt and ash and smallness. I gave you a kingdom. You stole it. I claimed what you were too weak to protect. That was enough." With a cry, Cinderella hurled the slipper off the tower. Time slowed. The slipper turned end over end and struck the stone ledge just before the drop. It cracked, bounced, then fell and shattered. The sound echoed like breaking bone. For a breathless moment, nothing changed. Then the other screamed, not in pain, but in fury, and lunged. Cinderella braced herself, but the blow never came. The doppelganger froze mid-lunge, hands twisted, mouth open, and then began to crack. Hairline fractures rippled across her skin like porcelain under heat. "No," she hissed. "I am real. I earned this." And then she collapsed into dust. The silence after was immense. The prince found her the next morning, curled beside the broken glass in the bell tower. She told him everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't scold or scoff. He listened, and when she finished, he took her hand in both of his and said, "I don't know what to make of it, but you're here. You're the one who feels like my wife." It was enough, for now. But even as Cinderella tried to return to normal life, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still watched her from the corners of mirrors, that when she turned too quickly, she caught a second shadow retreating into the walls, that sometimes, when she spoke, her echo came just a moment too late, as if someone else was repeating her words with a delay. 1 week later, she received a letter. It was slid beneath her door at dawn. No signature, no seal. Inside, a single sentence. "The other foot has yet to fall." There was blood on the glass slipper, not a smear, not a drop, but a blossom, thick, glistening, fresh, clinging to the insole, as though the shoe had taken a bite. Cinderella stared at it, transfixed, unable to move, even as the wind howled against the tower window. She had found the slipper tucked behind a chest in the attic, just where she remembered leaving it. Yet something was wrong. It smelled sweet, like rotting fruit. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't bled. Not this time. The last time she'd worn the slippers, the wound had been small. A blister burst during the ball, perhaps. The pain had been overshadowed by music and spun silks, and by the prince's eyes watching her every step. But now, as she reached to touch the crimson spot, the shoe seemed to flinch. The blood shimmered in the candlelight and sank into the glass like dye on silk. She didn't put it on. She didn't dare. Downstairs, the palace had grown quieter by the hour. Servants vanished. Courtiers whispered and excused themselves. Her maids no longer met her gaze, their eyes sunken, distant. Even the prince had grown oddly withdrawn, polite but strained, as though caught in a dream he couldn't remember. But dreams had a smell, and this one reeked of her. In the west wing of the palace, behind a cracked mirror, in a forgotten hall, something stirred. She had found a body, her own, lying motionless on a velvet settee, eyes open but blind, the skin pale, too pale, as if drained of something vital, the hair still golden, still curled, but with strands missing, pulled out at the root. The doppelgänger had stared down at her original and tilted her head, fascinated, then touched the glass slipper at her feet. Cinderella's scent, her voice, her memories, folded and stored like silken gloves. The magic worked best when there was only one of them, but now there were two, too many. Cinderella began locking her door at night. She didn't trust the servants, didn't trust the strange quiet in the halls, or the way she sometimes caught glimpses of herself, reflected where no mirror should be. Once she looked up from the bath and saw her own face peering down from the ceiling. It had smiled. She had not. She tried telling the prince. He listened, kind as ever, but something in his eyes betrayed him. He was tired, distracted. When she mentioned the slipper, he paled and changed the subject. When she pressed him, he reached for her hand with a strange gentleness and said, "It's all behind us now. You're safe. You won." Won? She hadn't known it was a competition. It was the cook who dared speak first. Cinderella crept into the kitchens one morning just after dawn, hoping for a moment's peace. The cook, a squat woman with flour-dusted arms, glanced up from kneading and froze. "You again?" she muttered, backing a step. Cinderella blinked. "I beg your pardon. You were just here, asked for lemon tea. Your hands were filthy, like you'd been digging." Cinderella's mouth went dry. "That wasn't me." The cook gave her a look of pure skepticism. "You sure about that, Highness? Maybe you're just forgetting things again. You all do that, you royal types." Cinderella left the kitchen without the tea. Her hands were clean, but under her fingernails she noticed something, a flake of dark earth, clinging like a secret. By midweek, the castle changed. It started in small ways, a corridor slightly longer than she remembered, a mirror that no longer reflected her face, but her back. The curtains in her bedchamber rustled without wind. The walls seemed to hum, a sound just beneath hearing, like a sigh stretched out forever. She searched for the source, her steps increasingly frantic. In the garden, the roses were blooming black. In the drawing room, the portraits began to weep. She woke one night to find her slipper at the foot of the bed, even though she'd locked it in the attic chest. When she went to check, it was gone. Only the bloodstain remained, dried and brown now, a perfect outline of a heel. The prince caught her crying in the stairwell. He knelt beside her, brushed her hair back, and whispered, "You're having dreams again." "I'm not asleep," she whispered. "I'm the only one awake." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for a moment the mask cracked. She saw fear there, confusion, regret. "What did you do?" she asked softly. He didn't answer, just kissed her temple and walked away. The next morning she awoke in the garden, not in a bed, not in her nightgown, but dressed in her ball gown, mud on the hem, thorns in her veil, hands scraped raw. The left slipper had returned to her foot. It fit perfectly, almost too perfectly. The bone of her smallest toe ached. From behind a hedge, a figure watched. She stood slowly. It looked like her, wore her dress, carried her voice, had her expression, but the eyes were wrong. They glowed. The chase was short. Cinderella ran through the garden, calling after the figure, but the roses turned with her. They curled toward her footsteps. Vines reached across the paths, twisting into words. One spelled her name, the other foot. She collapsed at the fountain, gasping. The reflection in the water was not her own. The other smiled and mouthed the words, "Let me in." That night, she tore apart the attic, every trunk, every chest, every forgotten garment, the old dresses, the burned apron, her mother's locket. She smashed the mirror with a poker, tore open the walls, found nothing, until she opened the floorboards. There, beneath the slats, was the other slipper, but changed. The heel was split, the toe warped, glass twisted like bone. It smelled faintly of copper and roses. Something wriggled inside it, a shadow, flickering in time with her breath. And next to it, wrapped in lace, a small rag doll, missing its face. Her hands trembled. She dropped the doll. The slipper rolled toward her. She locked it all away, but she couldn't lock away herself. That evening, the prince announced a ball, another one, to celebrate the anniversary, he said, his voice echoing too loud in the dining hall. Of the slipper, of the match, of our happily ever after. No one clapped, but everyone came. The nobles arrived in droves, glittering and silent, their eyes glazed with smiles that didn't reach their brows. They danced without music, toasted without wine, spoke in riddles, and Cinderella watched from the stair until the doppelgänger came, descending the steps, as she had once done, wearing her skin, wearing both slippers. The crowd turned to her, to the real her, in her simple dress, barefoot, bleeding, and they bowed to the other one, Cinderella ran through the halls, through the garden, back into the attic, slamming the door behind her. Her heart stammered against her ribs. She ripped the chest open, took the second slipper, held it in trembling hands. "If you want me," she whispered, "then take me." The slipper pulsed, and she put it on. The world changed. Everything inside her surged. Memories folded, reversed, rewritten. Her hands no longer hers. Her voice echoed, deeper, richer. Shadows crowded her vision, and at the edge of her mind, a voice like her own whispered, "One must die." Downstairs, the doppelganger danced with the prince. As Cinderella entered the ballroom, glass clicking on marble, silence fell. 2 Cinderellas, 1 truth, and only 1 slipper left to wear. The storm did not lift with the dawn. Grey clouds hung motionless over the kingdom, as if the sky itself hesitated to watch what would unfold. The streets, once gleaming with the promise of celebration and royal peace, now brimmed with the hush of dread. Merchants whispered, maids hurried with their eyes low, and in the castle, behind sealed doors and velvet drapes, silence pressed in like a hand over the mouth of the world. Cinderella stood before the mirror in her quarters, but the reflection was not hers. The glass no longer obeyed her. When she moved, the woman inside smiled on delay, like an actor too drunk to remember her cues. Sometimes the mirror Cinderella blinked too slow, or licked her teeth when she thought no one saw. Sometimes she winked, but Cinderella had not, and sometimes, worse, it didn't show her at all. Just the room, empty, and that horrible slipper sitting on the pillow. Cinderella had wrapped the remaining slipper in silk and locked it in the highest drawer of her writing desk, beneath the heirloom quills and a dried petal from her mother's wedding bouquet. She'd not dared to wear it again, but the mirror showed it anyway, on her foot, glistening like a lie told too many times to take back. She heard footsteps, the heavy, hesitant tread of the prince, not Henry, the one she'd married. She turned as the door creaked. He looked pale, older somehow, a man haunted by ghosts he couldn't name. His hand shook as he shut the door behind him, the other tucked behind his back. "I found her again," he said, voice brittle. Cinderella's stomach turned cold. "Where?" "In the nursery, the cradle, the one kept empty for some day." Her knees weakened, and she sat before she could fall. What was she doing? He looked at her for a long time, as if unsure whether to speak the truth. She was cradling a bundle, something small, wrapped in your wedding veil. He cleared his throat, looked away. She was singing. Cinderella felt as if her ribs were being folded inward. What song? His eyes met hers, full of cracks. The one your mother used to hum, the one you sang to me when I was sick. A long silence stretched between them, neither moving. Then Henry brought the hand out from behind his back. In it, He held something wrapped in linen, a handkerchief. Something inside it wriggled. "I didn't know what to do with this," he said, and placed it in her lap. With trembling fingers, she peeled the cloth open. A mouse, or something that had been a mouse. Its fur was half singed, one eye weeping black. Its back legs were bent the wrong way, and its squeaks sounded like words trying to rise from a drowning throat. "Oh gods," she whispered. She was feeding it. A drop of blood on her fingertip, like a mother nursing her child. Cinderella gagged and dropped the bundle. The mouse scurried to the edge of the carpet and vanished beneath the wardrobe, trailing the scent of iron and rot. Henry knelt before her, took her hands in his. "She's you, Cinderella." "But she isn't, and she's growing stronger." Cinderella's lips trembled. "What if she's the real one?" His grip tightened. "No, I was there. I chose you. Whatever this echo is, she came from that slipper, and we need to stop her." Cinderella felt her throat tighten, a rawness that came not from fear, but from guilt, because deep inside her, in the place where secrets rot, she had wondered, what if the slipper hadn't made a copy? What if it had split her? A knock broke the moment. A servant, pale, shaking. "My lord, my lady, you're needed in the East Hall, now." They arrived to chaos. Guards ringed the long corridor. Two lay unconscious on the floor, one with blood leaking from his ears, the other curled in a fetal position, muttering, "Not her eyes, not her eyes," over and over. The red carpet was torn, as if dragged by claws. At the far end stood the other Cinderella. Her dress was darker now, ashen grey, stitched with gold threads that shimmered like veins. Her hair fell in thick curls, no longer like Cinderella's, but like the Queen's. Her mouth wore a smirk that didn't belong to either of them. She held something in her hand, the glass slipper, the original. "Hello, darling," she called to Cinderella, voice rich with poison. "You've been busy." The prince stepped forward. "Drop the shoe." But the doppelganger only laughed. "You think this began with the shoe?" She took a step forward. "The shoe is the gate, but the gate was made from you. Every wish you buried, every word you swallowed, every smile you gave when you wanted to scream." She lifted the slipper. "I am the part you cast away." Cinderella whispered, "What do you want?" Her double blinked slowly. "To walk in your life without chains, to taste the things you denied us, love without obligation, desire without shame, power without apology." The guards moved. Too late. With a twist of her wrist, the slipper exploded in light, not shattered, expanded. A great bloom of glass erupted from it, unfolding like a deadly flower. Shards hovered in the air, refracting images that weren't real, memories twisted into new forms. Cinderella saw her stepmother, dead at her feet, but smiling, her stepsisters, clawing their way up from the grave, with shoes for hands, the prince impaled on a staircase of teeth. The images rippled with possibility. "Stop it!" Cinderella screamed, but her voice was swallowed in the sound of 1,000 mirrors breaking. Then everything went black. She woke in the old attic, the one she had scrubbed as a girl, the one where she had cried into cold pillows, dreaming of magic. The room looked the same, dusty, lit by a single window, only something was wrong. Her reflection in the window didn't match. She stood. The figure in the glass remained seated. The reflection smiled and began to speak. You thought you were better than me, but I am the part that endured. Cinderella tried to speak, but no sound came. Her reflection rose, walked toward the glass. With each step, it grew more solid, more real. The air buzzed, heavy with static. You wore the slipper, the double said, but I became it. She pressed her hand to the inside of the glass. It shimmered. Cinderella's hand moved on its own, pressed back, and with a horrible wrench, their fingers passed through. Glass folded around her skin like ice. The air rippled, and she felt a terrible pull. But then another hand seized her shoulder. A voice, faint but familiar. Not yet. The pull stopped. The mirror cracked, and Cinderella fell backwards into arms that caught her. The fairy godmother, but older, weary. Her once shimmering gown was frayed, her one dim. You broke the first rule, she whispered. You kept the magic. Cinderella gasped. I didn't mean. The godmother held up a trembling finger. Magic left too long begins to remember, and when it remembers, it wants. Cinderella sobbed. What do I do? The godmother placed a vial in her hand. Inside, a shimmer of light and dust. The counterspell, the last of my power. Use it on the slipper's heart. But it's gone. No. Her eyes burned with sudden fire. It's in her now. The attic began to shake. Splinters flew from the walls. The double was forcing her way through the mirror again. You must end it, the godmother whispered, before she ends you. And with that, the godmother vanished, leaving Cinderella alone, facing herself, no longer a copy, no longer a reflection, but a rival, a mirror that had learned how to walk. The doppelgänger stood in the ruined ballroom, bloodless yet flushed, her eyes two pale moons reflecting fractured memories. Around her, silence settled like a velvet shroud. Broken glass glittered on the marble. Shards of slipper and chandelier indistinguishable under the fading twilight, seeping through shattered windows. Cinderella, the real one, exhausted, trembling, and half mad, watched from the arched threshold, barefoot, her hair, once golden and pinned like spun sunlight, hung limp and matted with sweat and soot. The palace had become a tomb of illusions and vanity, and the twin, standing before her, was its mausoleum guardian. You aren't me, Cinderella whispered, not as a declaration, but a plea. The double tilted her head, mimicking the gesture like a curious raven. But I was made from you. The remaining glass slipper glowed faintly on the twin's left foot, pulsing like a living thing. Cinderella's missing one, her right slipper, remained clutched in her hands, its surface cracking under her grip. The slippers were never just shoes, they were promises, bargains sealed with wishful tears, and worn down by dancing through despair. The doppelgänger stepped forward. Each motion made the room groan, like the castle itself was bracing against collapse. I was everything you hid, every wish you swallowed, every resentment you denied. I wore the slipper better, because I wanted more than rescue. I wanted release. Cinderella stepped back, but the marble floor beneath her felt like ice, rooting her in place. You lied to yourself, Cinderella, the double said. You wanted out of the ashes, yes, but you also wanted revenge. You wanted your stepmother to choke on her pearls, your stepsisters to feel ugliness in their bones. You smiled as you danced because you believed they'd suffer for what they did to you. Cinderella faltered, tears rising like bile. She thought of Anastasia weeping on the stairs after the twin had crushed her hand with courtly grace, of Drizella's face frozen in horror as her throat filled with her own silk ribbon, tied too tight by invisible fingers, and Lady Tremaine, her own death too quiet to be noticed, curled up like a desiccated moth in her bedroom chair, her mirror cracked down the middle. No, Cinderella croaked, trying to steady her breathing. I never wanted death, but you wanted judgment. The doppelganger smiled. I simply made it clean. Behind them, the castle groaned again. The walls were beginning to warp. Paintings turned to shadows. Time, space, and memory, the very seams of this place, frayed. The twin held out her hand. You don't have to go back to scrubbing floors. You don't have to become a decoration in the prince's glass cage. With me, you could be whole, wear both slippers, become what you were always meant to be. Cinderella looked at the slipper in her hands. The magic pulsed under her skin, like a second heartbeat. The palace had been born from her wish. The twin had been shaped by her desires, and the cost was never made clear. She thought of the prince, how his love had always felt more like awe than understanding, how he looked through her, never at her, how he danced with a story, not a girl. Even he had begun to confuse the twin for the real thing. Maybe he never knew the difference. Her eyes narrowed. Why haven't you taken both slippers already? She asked. The doppelganger froze. Just a flicker, but it was enough. I can't, the double confessed. They belong to you. Both do. 1 foot for one soul. And if I destroy it, Cinderella raised the right slipper high. You destroy us, the twin said softly. You go back to ash, to mourning, to invisibility. Cinderella stared at the curve of the shoe, how it caught the light like crystal water in moonlight. This was the price of magic. Identity untethered, heart fractured, memory distorted, until you couldn't tell the wish from the wisher. And yet, her hands didn't tremble, not anymore. No, she said, I go back to myself. And with that, she slammed the glass slipper to the ground. The explosion was not sound, but silence, total and devastating. The twin let out a strangled cry, not of pain, but of breaking. Her body convulsed as the remaining slipper on her foot began to fracture, cracking from heel to toe in a network of glowing lines. The palace walls began to melt like candle wax, the illusion unravelling at last. "You fool!" the twin screamed, her voice warping. "You need me!" Cinderella took a step forward, barefoot, unafraid. I already had everything I needed. The doppelgänger reached for her, but her hand passed through air. Her form began to distort, hair becoming smoke, face losing its symmetry, voice scattering into echoes. Cinderella knelt beside her as she dissolved. "You were my anger, my vengeance, but not my hope." The twin smiled one last time, glass dust drifting from her eyes. "Then hope will get you killed." And then she was gone. The ballroom was quiet, empty. The light returned, pale and natural. The palace was no longer gilded with magic, no longer dressed in delusion. It was cold stone, hollowed grandeur. Outside, the world resumed. The curse lifted. Cinderella stepped over the pile of crystal dust, barefoot, back aching, breath steady. She left the ruins of the palace behind and walked down the long staircase. Each step echoed not with magic, but with her own heartbeat. Down in the courtyard, people emerged, servants once glamoured into mannequins, nobles who had forgotten their own names. They looked around in confusion, as if waking from a fever dream, and standing in the centre was the prince. His face twisted when he saw her, not in horror or anger, but in guilt. He took a step forward, saw the bare feet, the blood, the soot on her skin. "Cinderella?" he asked, uncertain for the first time. She said nothing, just looked at him. "You're different," he said. "Where's your glow?" She smiled without warmth. "Gone." He stepped closer. "We can fix this. Whatever's happened, You didn't love me," she interrupted, voice even. "You loved a performance, a silhouette, a wish in a dress." He blinked, confused. "You wore the slipper. That's all I needed." Cinderella laughed, not cruelly, but tiredly. "And I needed someone who saw me, even when I wasn't glowing." She turned, the crowd parting like grass under her feet. She walked past nobles, past servants, past memories. Her home no longer lay in a castle or a slipper. It was wherever she chose to stand. At the palace gates, she paused. Behind her, the prince watched, still not understanding. Perhaps he never would. She touched the pendant around her neck, the only real thing she'd ever kept, a locket with no picture, just space for the self. With a deep breath, she stepped onto the road, leading away from the palace. The ash from her past did not cling to her feet this time. As she walked, the winds picked up, trees rustled, the world, wide and quiet, opened before her like a blank page, and somewhere far behind her a final sound echoed, the soft chime of shattered glass carried away on the wind.